Hey guys, Kyle Bascombe here. I'm the Mercedes Catalog Manager here at FCP Euro, and welcome to our Mercedes W212 Buyer's Guide. So all of the information that we go over today will also be featured on our W212 Mercedes Owner's Hub. So if you want to browse DIYs, maybe technical specifications that we go over today, or just find out more general information about your W212, it'll all be featured here. The Mercedes W212 were sedans and wagons that were produced between 2010 and 2016. These were mid-sized luxury sedans that were otherwise known as the E-Class. A small caveat, in this video we're not going to be going over the convertible and coupe models because they were based on the W204 chassis, and they're known as the W207. So we'll feature those in a future video. We've got a lot to cover today. We're going to cover models, trims, engines, and more, so join us along in this video. So the W212 is the 8th generation of the E-Class model, going back to about the 1950s. It was produced between 2010 and 2016. It slots right above the C-Class model, if you're familiar with models like the E350 and E63 AMG, and it slots right below the S-Class, so models like the S550 or S65. What's great about the W212 is you can get anything from a family hauler, a wagon that you can throw a baby seat in and some skis for the weekend, all the way up to a drag strip monster like the AMG models. So the W in W212 is going to signify that we're dealing with the sedan versions of the chassis. For the purposes of this video, we're going to lump everything together. However, the wagons are typically called S212s. In terms of model nomenclature, everything's going to have an E in front of it, and then you'll have a 2 or 3 digit number that kind of alludes to the powertrain or drivetrain in each model. So there are 7 distinct models in the W212 lineup. You have your E250 and E350 Blue Tech, which were your diesel variants. You had your E350, which was featured all throughout the model range and had a 3.5 liter 6-cylinder engine. You had your E550, which was featured from 2010 to 2015. You had your E400, which had a hybrid powertrain initially, and then a twin-turbo 6-cylinder motor. And then the 63 variants, your E63 and E63S models. So when the W212 was introduced, there was pretty stiff competition in the segment. From Audi, you had the C7 Audi A6, BMW had the BMW F10 5 Series, and Jaguar had the Jaguar XF. So compared to the 211, the 212 is a little more angular in the front styling. So the 211 looks a little more modern in some ways than the 212 does. That obviously changed with the 212 facelift, where they really threw the book at the car. Mercedes spent a ton of money revising the W212 for the mid-cycle refresh. In some circles, they say they spent almost €1 billion when they did the facelift on the 212. Some of the most notable changes are going to be with the look of the exterior, lots of autonomous driving features and safety features, and minor updates to the interior. So starting with the interior, you'll notice a change with the gauge faces, for instance. And what you'll also notice is a lot of new symbols in the gauge that related to lane keep assist, blind spot assist. The vehicle could now also park itself because you had autonomous features. You had brake hold, so in traffic, if you are at a stoplight and you hold down the pedal and then release pressure, it would hold the brakes for you automatically. In terms of the exterior of the vehicle, Mercedes got away from the quad headlight setup. They went to LEDs, and you had the ILS or intelligent lighting system as an option as well. They also went to LED rear tail lights. And then if you look very closely at the rear quarter panel, they redesigned it and they got rid of the muscular haunches, let's call it, for a more clean sheet design. In terms of the interior, there are some design cues from the exterior in the interior, which is really cool on the 212. So as an example, if you look at the grille on the front of the 212, And then you look at the center vents in the center console, you can see that design continuity there. In terms of the materials that were used on the 212, they feel very luxurious, especially in the leather-appointed models. Those are really nice. And additionally, from an ergonomic standpoint, definitely feels better than the 211. In terms of the way these vehicles drive, the 212 had a suspension redesign that makes it feel lighter on its feet. The steering's a little lighter as well. It kind of reminds you of the W210 in some aspects. Really light on its feet, even though certain models are actually heavier than the 210. And in terms of the drivetrain, when they initially launched the model, a lot of the drivetrains were carryovers from the W211, like the 272, 273, and 156 motors. Just with tweaks and improvements from what they learned in previous generations. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, when it comes to the nomenclature for these vehicles, you have the E and then you have the 3 or 2-digit denoting the powertrain. So starting with the E250 was a 2.1 liter Blue Tech, it was called, diesel variant. So you had a 2.1 liter 4-cylinder engine. It put out about 190 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. So a lot of torque out of a very small package. The other diesel variant, which was featured in the E350 Blue Techs, was the OM642 motor. That was your 3-liter V6. It was turbocharged, and it put out about 210 horsepower and about 400 pound-feet of torque. So moving on to the gasoline variants, we have the E350, which was initially offered with a 3.5-liter 90-degree V6. This V6 was a carryover from the W211 models, and it was known as the M272. It had 268 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque. Now, the 272 was featured in the E350s that were offered in the 2010 and 2011 model years. Keeping with the E350, Mercedes introduced a new 3.5-liter V6 engine in the 2012 model year. This engine was known as the M276, and it also introduced direct injection. It had 302 horsepower and 273 pound-feet of torque. In some ways, it was similar to the M272, so you still had a 4-cam engine with variable cam timing. You still had the variable manifold, but they eliminated the balance shaft and made this a 60-degree V6 instead of the 90-degree like the 272. Moving away from the E350 and into the E550, the E550 originally featured a carryover powertrain similar to the E350. That model was introduced in 2010 and featured the 5.5-liter naturally aspirated V8. That motor was known as the M273, and it had 382 horsepower and 391 pound-feet of torque. The M273 was basically the sister engine of the M272, just a larger engine, so 5.5 liters and 8 cylinders. Starting in 2012, the E550 got a major motor upgrade. A smaller displacement 4.6-liter motor with 2 turbochargers and 8 cylinders. The M278 featured 402 horsepower and 443 pound-feet of torque. So moving into the E400, that powertrain was introduced in the 2013 model year. This was initially introduced as a hybrid drive paired against the M276. So you had the M276 V6, 302 horse, 273 pound-feet of torque, and then you also had an additional 27 horse from the electric motor and 184 pound-feet of torque. Now for facelift models in the 2015 and 2016 model year, Mercedes did away with hybrid drive and introduced the 276 with 2 turbochargers. Now for the fun stuff, the AMG models. AMG models featured hand-built engines. Initially, when the 212 was launched, it was launched with the carryover engine, which was the M156. M156 was a 6.2-liter V8 engine, put out 518 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque. Starting in the 2012 model year, Mercedes introduced the direct injection engines and turbocharging to the AMG lineup. So they had the M157 motor. It was based on the M278, so a very similar architecture, however, more displacement. So 5.5 liters, it produced 550 horsepower and 531 pound-feet of torque. So with the facelift models also came the introduction of the E63S. Now that motor offered 577 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque. All right, so now that we've discussed engines, let's talk about how these vehicles put their power to the ground, specifically transmissions. Every W212 model featured the Mercedes 722.9 7-speed transmission. Most models were a torque converter transmission. AMG models featured a wet startup clutch instead of the torque converter, and it was called the MCT transmission in those applications. What AMG basically did was they took the MCT from the SL63 and put it in the 63 when they launched the vehicle. So now we'll breeze through how each model puts its power to the ground, whether it's rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, depending on the model. When the 212 was first launched in 2010, the E350 was only offered as a sedan. The wagon wasn't introduced yet. You can get an E350 as a rear-wheel drive variant or with Mercedes 4MATIC, which was their all-wheel drive. If you purchased an E350 wagon, the only way you could get the drivetrain was with the 4MATIC. If you purchased an E350 BlueTech model, those were only available as a rear-wheel drive variant. If you purchased an E400 and it had a hybrid drivetrain, those were only available rear-wheel drive. When Mercedes introduced the direct injection motor with twin turbocharging, you could get it rear-wheel drive or in 4MATIC. For the E550 sedan, when it was initially introduced in 2010, you could get it as a rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive model. Starting in 2012 with the introduction of the twin turbocharged motors, you could only get it as a 4MATIC application. For the E250 BlueTech, this model now offered you the opportunity to get 4MATIC in addition to rear-wheel drive. Moving on to AMG. AMG models with the M156 engine were only available in rear-wheel drive. Starting in 2014, and with the introduction of the S models, you could only get E63s as all-wheel drive. For AMG models, they had torque vectoring, and they also had a different torque split of 33 front, 67 rear. So regardless of if you had a rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, or AMG model, all vehicles featured the 7229 7-speed transmission, which was a very robust transmission. It does have some common issues, so things to keep in mind are you want to keep up with the fluid changes for the transmission. There have been complaints of shifting issues, which can be resolved at the software level by going to the dealer and make sure that the transmission module is flashed with the most up-to-date software. There are also known issues with speed sensor codes, which might require replacement of the electro-hydraulic controller, which is called the conductor plate. A couple of things to keep in mind with the all-wheel drive drivetrain. With the 7229, the transfer case is integrated into the transmission, and the main transmission fluid is shared with the transfer case circuit. So you really want to be changing your fluid at a 40,000 mile interval. Some common issues with that drivetrain: the front drive shafts, the U-joints do fail, so you want to check your front drive shaft whenever you have the car in the air. Also, at the rear of the transmission, at the output shaft, there are bearings that can fail and cause a howling and grinding noise and things of that nature. Unfortunately, kind of an expensive repair if that is the case. We do have a kit available on the website. So now that we've talked the drivetrain, we're going to move into suspension. When it comes to suspension, most models featured steel suspension all around, and for the first time in quite some time, the E-Class moved to a McPherson strut front setup. There was air suspension featured on the 550 models, so you had 4-corner Airmatic, and then with the introduction of the direct injection models, they got rid of the Airmatic system. For AMG models, you had self-leveling in the rear. For wagon models, you also had automatic self-leveling in the rear. What's great about the clean sheet design of the suspension for the W212 is when you're driving the vehicle, it's a really nice combination of luxury and performance that you get out of that suspension feel. Much improved feel and much improved handling over the previous generation W212 chassis. So not a lot going on in terms of options for brake systems on the W212. If you had a luxury equipped W212, your brake rotors were solid face. If you had a sport model, you had the perforated or the cross-drilled rotors. If you had an AMG model, you had much larger brakes with multi-piston calipers. And you also had an option for carbon ceramic brakes as well. An option that was not available on the previous generation. All right, so that about wraps it up for the W212 Buyer's Guide. A lot of information to take in there, but I hope you found it super helpful. If you have any questions at all, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and also be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.